Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the 8th round of the Cyclocross World Cup. We are 2/3 in already, crazy how quick it goes with the packed schedule and the Christmas period. With me here to discuss the racing in Besancon is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I rushed back to the hotel after the race to do some recording before it's dinner time. Luckily they eat their dinners quite late in France, but I doubt Mathieu van der Poel will be waiting for that. He came here with a lot of news around him because he took a private jet here and he also took a private jet in the race because within no time he was gone. I think it was in the second or perhaps the third lap that he dropped Toon Aerts, who had the fastest start, and from there on the world champion was never seen again. With the cruise control on, he took the victory. Toon Aerts, after that fast start, was fighting with Niels van der Putten in the first half of the race, but the Deschart Hens FSP rider was just that bit stronger, took second place ahead of van der Putten. It was quite a straightforward race. The course was muddy, it was heavy, there was a lot of power required. At the same time, you also needed a lot of technical skills because it was really slippery. It was not necessarily the same as in the pre-ride yesterday, as in the training. There, the top layer was soft and the layer below was frozen. Definitely by the time the Many Elite raced, pretty much the entire course had defrosted and was just slippery. Van der Poel didn't really have any issues with that. What I noticed was, like, if you compare it to the rest, like, the way that he leans in with his body and compensates movement of his bike with his body is just absurd compared to the rest. His feeling on the bike is so good. And you could see the fans came out in big numbers. There were quite a lot of fans here, and a lot of them came for Mathieu van der Poel. You can call it a bit overdone that he takes a private jet here. I mean, I would agree a 6-hour car drive isn't that bad if you're an athlete. But at the same time, he's also the ultimate showman, right? It's part of who he is and why people love him and other people hate him. This is who he is. He comes in a Lamborghini, he comes in a private jet. He's the superstar, he's the rock star of cyclocross at the moment.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And I think that is that's maybe a little bit the environment you kind of land in a way. And he takes that role upon himself. I don't think that he deliberately wants to be in that role, but I guess just, the performances and the attention that you get. And, from one thing comes the other. I think that, in terms of flying to Besançon, I mean, you can have your opinions on that. But if you focus on the race today, it was again a race within expectations. He waited it out maybe a little bit more than he normally would. Toon Aerts was up there for a fight and had a very good day. But yeah, for Van der Poel, it was just a matter of time. And when he got the lead, I think he was struggling a little bit in the first 2 laps with grip, but he figured that out. Maybe some change in the tire pressure, and from there on, it was, he was gone, and he was in control of the race and never really got in big trouble. As expected. For the guy that finished in second with Toon Aerts, I think that he finally had that race that I was somewhat waiting for in these type of conditions. I think that it was great to see that he was able to have a race with not that many mistakes, that he was able to be at the front for basically the entirety of the race. He was under pressure by Van der Putten, but he managed very well, and I think that's great to see for Toon Aerts, who have been struggling in the last couple of races, also with illness, had to then eventually, put in a small break, and he's now back. Seems like he's recovered, and he comes back with a bang. I think that this is a little bit what he probably had expected from these type of races, and he finally delivers, and that's just great to see.
So for me, the interesting thing in that battle for second, to the extent that we can call it a battle because it was decided quite early, was that it was 2 different rider types. Aerts, the more powerful rider, Van der Putten, the more technical rider. And you could see that Aerts piled the pressure on, right? So Van der Putten could compensate in a few sections with his ability to ride corners a bit faster or shoot up banks a bit better. But Aerts definitely drained the legs of Van der Putten on that road climb. He put down the pace. He was constantly driving it. And as you say, it was a good race by him. He was very aggressive in the start, and honestly, it's also a weapon, right? Because we've seen this season on both the men's and the women's side that the riders at the front, or the eventual front runners, don't necessarily have the best starts. So that means that For instance, today Elise beat Michael van Torenhout were way back, and Aerts capitalizes on that. I think he was perhaps also a bit inspired by what happened with Zweek in Mol. So if you can just tag on to Van der Poel for just that little bit, you can create a buffer that's so big that nobody else really comes in contention for your second place anymore. Ultimately, that didn't really work out this way, but still, like Van der Putte and Aerts, they were never a threat from anyone from behind, and I think there's two ways to look at that, right? So on one hand, it was because they started aggressively open that gap, and from there on they could roll. And on the other hand, the two main protagonists, like the two other strongest rider in the race that could have featured there, Poel Sauze-Duo, Iserbyt and Van Torenhout, had horrible starts because I think at the end of the first lap, Iserbyt was 24th and Van Torenhout outside of the top 30. I mean, you're making your life very, very, very difficult. And Iserbyt rode a very, very, very good second half of the race. But you don't buy anything for that at the end if your first two laps are so bad.
No, absolutely. I think that Iserbyt today, at least from the impression that I got from him and also the lap times, you can really see that he was, if he had a good start, he was definitely in for a fight for a podium place. That is, as you say, you cannot really buy much from that. And you cannot really do anything with that information. You basically have to make sure that you start well. And it was today again. It's pretty much an off day for Iserbyt on the first lap, and then from there on, you obviously have to make up some ground, and he did so. You know, midway through the race, they were even mentioning that his lap times were very similar to Van der Poel. So at a certain point, he definitely made up some ground, but that's also going to cost you energy, and you saw it that in the later phase of the race, it costed him more and more energy, which was a normal thing to happen. I think that really costed him a podium spot, to be honest, today, and was quite visible as well. It's not that I'm saying something crazy. I think he missed out on that, but that's an issue. And as you say, it's interesting to see that some of the guys that normally are riders that can fight for a podium or at least be in the top 5 struggle with the starts, and that gives an opportunity to Toon Aerts and Van der Putte to really capitalize on that when they are not having a bad start. But I think nevertheless, despite their fast start, they also had just a very good race. I think that Aerts technically today was surprisingly well. I think that he did a good job in that regard. And Van der Putte, as you say, he was able to put him under pressure a little bit in some of those sections. And he lost out then a little bit more on the sections where power was more a thing, and Toon Aerts really could put him under pressure there. And then just the ground that Iserbyt and Van Torenhout, Van Torenhout, his first lap was awful. Then also had to change his shoe. Those are things. I thought at a certain point that Van Torenhout would just, give up, but he didn't because he has some points to defend in the classification. And I think in the end it was damage limitation and wasn't a bad result. It could have been way worse, but I think that he is going to look back on this race, both him and Iserbyt, and going to say that was a waste of a race because it could have been way better for both.
Yeah, you definitely don't say anything crazy when you make the statement that Iserbyt lost the podium, because if you just look at the lap times, in the first lap he lost nearly 40 seconds to Aerts, and then in the next lap he lost another 10 to Aerts. And if you look from then, Iserbyt is faster in every single lap. He's 2 seconds faster in lap 3, and then he is 6 seconds faster, then he's another 3 seconds faster, and then in the final lap he's more than 10 seconds faster. So definitely gained some ground there. He could definitely have been in that mix, but ultimately he can only blame himself for it. It is good to see that his injury isn't hampering him too much. So I think he can, in the end, only blame himself, and the same goes for Van Torenhout because he had a bad start and then also crashed and broke his shoe in that crash. Again, with the shoes, like you see a lot of these shoes breaking, and I ride with Boas on the road. They're great for the road because it spreads the pressure of your shoe all over your foot, but I question for cyclocross how good they are, because it's the second time this season that Van Torenhout needs to change his shoe. I'm not necessarily saying you need to go to laces, but surely there should be another system or a version of the BOA they can create that's more robust, that's stronger, because it's not an isolated incident. It happens quite often, and in cross where things break quite easily because you crash quite often and there's a lot of things involved. You don't want that. You don't want to go into the pits and change the shoe because while they've gotten quite quick at these changes, it's still at least 5-6 extra seconds that you lose by doing them. And that's not even mentioning the fact that you need to come to a complete halt to do one. So I would like to make one final comment on Van de Putte. You mentioned that he struggled on the power sections. I think I also mentioned that. It's also important to remember that for Van de Putte, this is his 6th day of cyclocross racing in the last week. He has done every single race. He's only skipping Bow in this period, and those are choices, but definitely that hurts the freshness. And that's also something that you can see. It wasn't necessarily the case today for Van Toerenhout, who had to continue to defend his leader's jersey. At some point I thought, well, you might lose it to Aerts. It's going to be completely out of contention, but then he limits the damage to 11 points. But, for instance, we'll come to later in the women's race, Brandt, her bad starts can be potentially due to fatigue, that you don't have the explosiveness early in the race and need to settle in. But more on that later. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Van der Poel with the win ahead of Aerts, Van der Putte, Iserbyt and Wieseuren. Solid ride by him. 6th place went to Thomas Meen ahead of Michael van Toerenhout. Kevin Kuhn in 8th, Borost in 9th and Felipe Orts in 10th after a late mistake. Issam, we had a full Dutch-Belgian top 5, but then it's a bit of a shame that Van Toerenhout made his way that far up, but we had a multinational back end of the top 10. It was fun to see. And above all, the standout ride of the weekend by Thomas Meen.
Yeah, I definitely think that was quite the ride. And great to see that he was able to... I think he got presented a course that suits his abilities quite well. But, this season, it has been sort of a... in the races that are televised in a way, he kind of struggles a little bit. Sometimes he's able to get himself within the top 10 or just outside, but it was never really a mentionable result that we got from Meen this season. And I think today he definitely deserves his props. He was kind of always up there in the top 10 and he managed himself well. There was never really that moment in which certain riders, for example, Roulier, who was up there in the top 10, in the end was not even able to get himself within the top 20. So I think that he didn't have that issue, and he was able to manage himself quite well through the course. And today was a tough one, despite the fact that maybe the conditions were a little bit better than they were yesterday in the training ride. I think that it was still, you could still really get the, power was definitely still a factor, and it was something important during this, the circumstances that they had on this course. And I think that for him, he just delivered in a way that I personally didn't expect him to be able to, at least if you look at the season and how it played out for him so far. There were some positive signs, but it was never really like a, something that was encouraging enough to say that he was going to be able to, even be in the mix for a potential top 5 and eventually finishing 6th. I think that was, for me at least, somewhat of a surprise, but great to see. And, if you look at that battle that was there kind of for the top, from basically P5 to P10, that was interesting to see. Also with the French there, with Dubois and Venturini not being able to get themselves within the top 10. Orts was up there, as you say, but the mistake wasn't the greatest. Kuhn was up there and was able to hold this pace somewhat instead of really fading. So I think that it was, that was great to see. Borders as well. So I think that was great. Maybe there is, I don't want to be that guy, but there is some perspective that you can put on. We are missing some guys, but still, nevertheless, I think that it was great to see that those guys were able to really put themselves in those positions, because I think it's only for the best of the sport, I guess, because we don't really need to see only the Belgians and the Dutch. That's kind of what the sport needs in a way. Other nationalities being able to bring up a fight, and I think that's only for the greater good, and I enjoyed it.
I mean, there's definitely the point to be made, right, that there is some perspective. Thibaut Nys isn't here, Lars van der Haar wasn't here. Those are points you can make, right, they aren't here. But there's also the point to make that they beat riders who don't deliver on the day. Pim Ronhaar finishes 19th, Zweek finishes 18th. They don't live up to the expectations that they carry. And you can only beat those who are there. And regardless of who are there, a sixth place in a World Cup is always going to be impressive. And for Thomas Mien to deliver that, this is by far the best performance of his career. Yes, we know he loves these conditions. We've seen him in the televised races. I recall a top 10 in the Koppenberg, I think 2 seasons ago. I think we've seen him close to the top 10 in other instances, like last year in Diegem. But this is a performance of massive amounts. It's special. Sixth place in a World Cup is not something that comes easy. And he also raced in Loenhout and he was 7th there. And this start field was more packed than Loenhout. So I guess that's all you need to know, right? If you want to put it in perspective, sure, admit that people aren't there. But it's also still a great performance by Thomas Mien, who overperforms and delivers on the day. If you look at the other nationalities in the top 10, Orts is kind of somebody who you expect there now. He made a few too many mistakes towards the end of the race. Boros is somebody who likes these conditions. He was at the World Championships last year in Tabor. He was in the top 10, 7th place. Solid outing by him. He's 32. Obviously, he's not going to be improving that much more, but he was definitely able to showcase that he still has a top 10 in him. Then Kuhn, I think you said it quite well, and for Roulier, when he was up there, he was like, I don't know, he downloaded like the Kevin Kuhn software update or something, because he was going at it. I saw him like aggressive, making moves, moving into the top 3, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, just sit in these wheels, this is already too fast for you, you're already going to explode. And then he fell back to 27th, but the funny thing was, all these French spectators, they just, because he was up there at the front, to every single Heizomat Raad team rider, whether it was Hendricks or Roulier or Sommer, no matter who it was, they would be, allez Roulier, allez Laurie, allez, because apparently that's the only reason they knew what the green kit was.
But did they not notice that Roulier was coming, was getting there a couple of times too many in a lap, or were they too drunk to notice at that point?
I really don't know, but this guy on the stairs, every single Heizomat rider got the cheers. I think there were like 2 of them were ahead of Roulier at that point, and he thought both were Roulier, and then the third time it was like, oh wait, this is really Roulier. Whatever, I don't know. It was funny to see. The atmosphere was great today, and as you said, the French Dubois 12th. This is a rider who a couple of years ago, from top of my head, 2 seasons ago, was consistently able to deliver top 10s in the World Cups. It might also be 3 seasons ago with the World Championships in Fayetteville. That might be the season that he did quite well. He's then shifted his attention a bit more to mountain biking with some initial success in Nove Mesto. After that, the real French mountain bikers really took over from him. So I think it's a bit of a shame to see him not do that many cross races. This was his first World Cup. He did decent on the Coupe de France circuit. But still, 12th is a decent result for him. Venturini at 13th in these conditions is also good. And I think it's a trend, Issam, because we'll come to all the other races, but the French really delivered today. Not only in terms of atmosphere, but their riders also delivered on the circuit. Let's talk about the women's race then. Here the world champion, in this case Van Empel, also dominated the race from start to finish. She managed to break away from Capablanca Vash quite early on, and well, she defended an 8-second lead on Brandt and Vash, but she was never under pressure. She just slowly but steadily managed to build that gap a bit more, eventually taking the win some 40 seconds ahead of Brandt, who dropped Vash halfway through the race. I don't think there's real much to this victory apart from the fact that Van Empel was better and smoother. She was stronger up the climbs. On that road climb, she definitely put some time into Brandt, partly because she has a lot of power, also partly because she was fresher at that climb. Brandt struggled with the technicalities on this course is what I saw, and again, her start was really not good enough. She burned a lot of matches to move from 16th or 17th to 2nd, and if you want to compete against this Van Empel, that's just unacceptable. It wouldn't have mattered today, but again, if she wants to have a chance at the World Championships or at any race, you cannot permit yourself to week after week have a start like this. And it sounds a bit repetitive, but that's really the takeaway I had from the side of the course.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. I think that for Brandt it was today, as you say, as much as the start definitely mattered in a way in terms of your energy and how much you have to spend to try and get into the race for and a fight for victory. I think that it was in the end, Van Empel was today just better, and that is, I think, for Van Empel at least, is definitely a sign she definitely wanted to have and probably needed a race like this just to get that confirmation of everything is okay. The form is there. There were definitely moments in the race that could have gone bad, and that could have maybe interrupted a little bit the race for her, but that didn't happen, and she was able to at least be as consistent as possible, stay out of the big mistakes. And when you do that, then I think that she can really somewhat show the form that she has, and that at the moment currently is just being the best in the field. And that's for her, as I say, that's definitely encouraging, and it looks like she's on the right path at the moment. And we have to wait and see how that will play out over the course of the next couple of races that she will do towards the Worlds. But I think for her at least that this was a race that will do her good, and just a positive sign as a whole. But for Brandt today, as you say, she's a bit struggling now, trying to keep it together at the start and be up there at the front, and yeah, that just costs you a lot. But I think, for me at least, someone that positively in a way surprised me was Vash. I think that Vash today had a very good outing. It was, in the end maybe struggled a little bit towards the later phase of the race, but I think that was already way less than we have seen so far this season. And I think overall it was just a very good race from her side. I think that, and I'm not going to say something, I don't want to, draw conclusions too quickly, but I think that if she's able to improve just a little bit more and be able to have also a good ending of the race and not fade too much, I think that when we go to World Championships like Liévin, she is slowly but surely becoming a medal contender, in my opinion. I think that if she's able to stay fresh, have a good form, and get to the Worlds in good shape and not have any bad luck, I think that today she definitely, in my eyes, presented herself as a medal candidate. Maybe in your eyes she already was, but I think for me at least this was a very good race. And of course Alvarado, wasn't really up there, wasn't really up for the challenge to fight for a podium. Petersen is not here. Today was really, I think, a really good race from her side. But I don't know how you looked at the race of Vash, but that's my take somewhat on Vash's race.
So it seems like we are already in that part of the season, right? That everything is in function of the World Championships. We're a month out. This course here in Besancon, I will say, leans quite close to that course in Liévin. Liévin is a slightly less technical version of this, but in terms of elevation, in terms of technicalities, in terms of how wide it is pretty similar. It's a stereotypical French course, and I do agree with you. Vash will put her name forward, and for me, Vash is always a dangerous rider at a championship because she can peak for a championship like no other. Last year she got COVID, but where was she the week before? In Hogerheide, she was second. Where was she the week before that in Benidorm? She was fifth. Those were her two best performances of the season. Flashback to a season before that, where was she the week before the World Championships, delivering one of her best races of the season here in Besançon. Again, flashback to another year back, before Fayetteville. Where was she the weeks before the World Championships? Third in Flamanville and fifth in Hogerheide. Again, some of her best results of the season. She's always dangerous at championships, and she's definitely improving. I don't really know if it was a surprise. I thought the course here was relatively okay for her. And especially when Alvarado then doesn't really deliver or doesn't deliver at all, it's to me not super surprising that Vash is the one benefiting here, because Backstedt, this course was really too technical for her. But yeah, Vash looked good. And if we're talking about what does it mean towards the World Championships, we know that Vash has done fewer race days. We know that she is not going to race the national championships because she's going to go training, and that will help her. If you look at Brandt, she's done 19 race days so far. She's going to race the nationals most likely because she wants to do that. She's racing almost every single race because she wants to win all the classifications. And really, you can make a good point for it. She's a full-time cross rider. There is a lot of money on the line. If she sweeps all the classifications, that's like 150k going right into her bank account. But that also has the downside, right? So Van Empel, yes, she's more fresh now. But that might be a lasting effect. Because Brandt is going to race the Nationals, whereas Van Empel will be chilling in the Spanish sun. She's going to be around Benidorm and then return there. And we've seen the last few years that no matter what happened in this part of the season, after that training camp, she hits the Benidorm World Cup, she hits the Hoogheide World Cup, and she hits Worlds in a really good form. So I think it's interesting. Obviously, we spent a lot of time in the Gavere podcast on it already, but Van Empel is really putting herself forward as the top favorite after a lesser season start compared to the past seasons, but she's becoming more and more the outright favorite for the third world title. I still think a lot will depend on the day. It's a bit more competitive than last year, but we're in that phase of the season. Everything means something and everything means nothing towards the World Championships, and we just try and do our best to unscrew all the results. But another name is I would like to put in the mix for that is Marianne Vos. She finished 5th today at her return. To me, that was a really good result because she needed to start on the 4th row. These are not good conditions for her. I think back to the Marianne Vos that became world champion in Fayetteville. Even in that season, like in Dendermonde, in Hulst, when it was muddy, it was hard for Vos. She makes her comeback now, and I was like, well, it could be good because the course is fast. Then the weather forecast changed and the temperatures went above zero, so the course completely melted and it became muddy. And still, a 5th place. She delivers.
She absolutely did, and I think, hats off to someone that is accomplished already almost everything that you can accomplish and more in the sport. That is a legend that is still competing among the other women, but despite the fact that you could maybe argue that today she got a course that doesn't suit her that well, I still think that it somewhat was an advantage in a way because settled into a certain rhythm. She was already quite far up in the group and she was able to figure her pace out and pace herself quite well. And I would say I didn't have that many expectations from her re-entering again. I thought that if you would have told me that she would have been able to finish 5th, I would say that was maybe a little bit too ambitious. I think that a top 10 would have been more realistic at that time. But to finish 5th, the way she did, Buckstead on the last lap is very hard to beat, I have to say, because that last lap from Buckstead was very good. But Vos, is just, I don't know. It's for me, it's just special to see someone like her being able to, bring it up again and race among the younger generation in a way and just give it her all. I mean, she absolutely gave it her all today, as if it was more than just a race. But yeah, I have to say I was in awe in a way, and it was great to see that she was able to be amongst the very best that we have in the world. Top 5 is great, and from here you can only build. And I'm just interested to see how that progression will be. I don't know if she confirmed if she is or is not going to do the Worlds. It's just great to have her back in the field, and I think it's a great result overall. It looked also quite good, I have to say. She really had to fight for it, but it looked quite good. It looked very decent for someone that just entered the field again and basically is doing her first race back.
Vos racing the World Championships or not will depend on her performances in partly this race, but also the Nationals, and would she get selected? Well, with this result, she certainly puts her name in the mix. She finishes ahead of Alvarado. I'll ask you if there was any explanation for that in a bit, but Vos races with this grinta. I could already see that yesterday in the practice. She was doing a couple of hot laps. She was really going at it. It was really, really nice to see, and that's how she always races, also on the road. And I mean, at such an age to still compete, she's the greatest cyclocross rider of all time, especially on the women's side, 8 world titles. It's impressive, right? And she does it because she loves the game, and she still has one more season in her, clearly, and, well, many, many more. She just keeps going. So it was really good to see her in there, beating Alvarado, as said. And now I'll ask you the question. Was there any explanation for this poor performance by Alvarado or not?
Basically, from the start, it wasn't great. It was not you missed the start and then you get back through the field. And no, it was just off, I have to say. It was not her day. I think you can somewhat conclude that performance in that sentence somewhat. It was just not her day. She was not really able to get it going. She was not really able to be amongst, where she was around. I think there was somewhat of a poor performance from her side. Not her day. I don't think we need to draw too many conclusions, but definitely picks her races a little bit more compared to a Brandt. But I think that for her also the season is going to count at some point. It's just, the amount of races that they have been doing. I think Alvarado is now at 17 or 16, I'm not sure. Like that's quite an amount of races, and in this period you're always going to have, these type of races where a rider is just not really able to deliver to what their expectations are. And I think with Alvarado that was definitely today the case, because normally she definitely should have been able to be in the mix for a podium place. It wasn't there, and it wasn't there from the start, to be honest. She had to fight back a little bit. Eventually, with some fighting spirit, was able to finish in 6th. But yeah, I don't think that she is going to be happy with the result. And, we have to wait and see how it will play out. I think, for her, she's definitely going to show up in Diegem with the Super Prestiges, so she's not going to have that day off. And then from there on, most likely we'll probably skip the XO trophy, at least in Bao. And then I don't know if she will show up in Kokzijde. But yeah, I mean, we said it before we actually entered this Christmas period. We were going into a period in which you're going to get these type of results in which riders are just going to be so fatigued and or just, have an off day in a way because of the races that accumulate, and they just get more and more, and that just, a rider cannot really withstand that at some point. So yeah, it will be interesting if she's able to bounce back in this period and if it will get better. But I don't think there is any reason to panic for Alvarado at the moment.
Yeah, I was mainly wondering if there was any information on the broadcast that something had happened, but clearly there wasn't. I couldn't really figure anything out from the side, apart from that it just doesn't look as smooth. That consistency that there was at the beginning of the season, that's gone. As you say, she's done a lot of races. She's cutting back, so no Baal, no Kokzijde for her. It's going to be Diegem, and then next weekend it's going to be Gullegem and Dendermonde. Maybe she cuts back Dendermonde even, I don't know. But clearly they're going to try and figure out. The form probably is declining a bit. It's been hard, so we'll see. And at the same time, we also shouldn't overreact, right? We've seen it a couple of times now, like Hulst wasn't good, and then she hit back with wins in Zonhoven and Mol. So maybe she does the same tomorrow and takes the win in Diegem. But again, that just shows the consistency isn't there. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. We've discussed many riders already. Van Empel took the win ahead of Brandt, Vars, Bakstedt and Vos. Alvarado 6th ahead of Inge van der Heijden and Norbert Ribeyrol. Celia Giry ends 9th ahead of Helene Clauzel in 10th. 2 French riders in the back end of the top 10 Issam, but really, while the ride of Clauzel is also good, I have to take my hat off for that performance by Celia Giry. First year U23 in the AS bike racing kit today. She was previously racing in the French kit a number of times, but today, in the colors of our team, she delivers. I mean, that was a really impressive ride by her. At such a young age, to deliver on such a demanding course like this, that deserves a round of applause.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Clauzel, it was definitely great to see that she was able to pull off a top 10 finish. I think she was very happy with that, but yeah, Giry was a special performance, I have to say. On this is a course that demands somewhat a big engine. You have to be on your toes in certain sections. The mistakes can creep up quite easily, especially when you're a little more fatigued. It was in some areas was somewhat tricky, but she managed well. She held on quite well to that top 10 position. I think in the end, when she finishes in a place where you normally would not expect her in a way, but she has done already some special things this season, and I think today is definitely a result that you can add to those special moments in which she proves her potential. So it's going to be interesting, to see how it will play out in the end, but and how that will progress into the season. But it's great to see that she is able to to deliver, and in front of a home crowd. I think that towards the Worlds, it's going to be interesting what she can do towards a competitor like a Schreiber and maybe Bakstedt if she goes for the under-23 title again. I think that will be very interesting. But I think today yeah, special performance. There's not really much to add. And I mean, the pressure that she probably had going into this race, it's a World Cup, but still in front of your home crowd and you want to do well. And she delivered.
She's obviously really talented. She's been signed by FDG, which has a partnership with the AS Bike team, and she does so well. I mean, she was 14th in Zonhoven, which already indicated something, and again, you can make the perspective point here. Like, a number of riders aren't there. We see, for instance, that Puk Pieterse isn't there, but it's still a really good performance, and I think that U23 World Championships is going to be super packed, because you see today Cherie excels and beats Schreiber, who had that bad crash in the first lap and then just couldn't get going anymore. But she also beats Benveld, who had good races last weekend. And if you then add in, for instance, Eva Holmgren, Isabella Holmgren, it's quite packed up there. While she delivered today, wasn't the only rider that stood out there. Amandine Muller, also a first-year U23 racing for France, and the AS Bike team, finishes 14th today. She wasn't too far off Bentveld, just half a minute. That was also an impressive result. It shows also the development of these riders. Okay, Cherie, last year the big favorite for the world title, also won the world title. But Muller is somebody who's been developed a bit more. She finished 11th at the World Championships last year. That wasn't her best result of the season. She was 3rd in Namur and 4th in Dublin and 6th in Hogerheide. But she's made big progression. 14th here is no result to be ashamed of, and I think the same should be said for the 16th place of Vida Lopez de San Roman, another first-year U23 in the mix here. They're doing quite well. Imogen Wolf, another first year. This course was a bit too technical for her. 21st is still not a bad result, and it's just exciting to see all this talent move in. And of course, for Wolf, we should also make the case she was on the podium 2 days ago. Big transfer after that, not as fresh. But whatever, it's still a decent result, and it's always fun to see these talents come through and deliver and shine with a 9th place for Cherie. Then let's move to, in my opinion, the best part of the podcast, the yap session about the youth races, some experiences from me in Besancon. So I arrived here on Friday, just went for a quick dinner downtown, did a bit of sightseeing. Saturday, visited in with some riders in the morning, then went to the course for the training in the afternoon. It's always fun to see that and see the course conditions, plot like where to watch and see how riders are doing. It usually gives a pretty good idea of what's going to come. And then the racing came this morning. We arrived at 7:45, 8, nice in time, very far ahead of the races. And one thing I noticed was when you're in the Belgian races, yes, there's the Junior World Cups last week in Zonhoven and Hulst, but the fans, they don't really turn out. They just kind of flood in during the day, especially during the Junior Women's race. A bit more start to arrive. During the U23, it gets a bit busier, and then most people are there before the women start, but especially in Belgium, more people flood in. Here in France, totally different. There were quite a lot of people already. There was a super, super long line to get into the venue at 9, 30 minutes before the racing started. And those people just stayed their entire day. Yes, it did get busier throughout the day, but there were a lot more people who just decided, well, I'm going to come for all the racing. And I don't know if that's related to the fact that the French are traditionally very good in the youth categories, or if it's just the love of the cross. I would be inclined to think the second. Also, I forgot to mention this before, but if you're hearing any background sound now, that's the tram. It's quite loud. It goes right in front of my hotel in the city center here. So, yeah, Issam, I think we should start with the U23 racing then. So, kind of in line with what we've seen this season, Tibor Del Grosso this time could start on the front row. He attacked in the second lap. He got away and comfortably took the win. Behind him, there were some changes during the race. Jente Michels again had a bad start, went into second, then crashed, fell back, crashed again and finished outside of the top 10. Nathan Beaumenel, the French champion, was in second for a while, but he started way too fast. He fell back. He finished sixth in the end. There was a quite big group for second, I think some 6 riders, but as soon as this group was kind of created because 3 riders and 3 riders merged, and at that moment Sparfell attacked immediately. He was in that first group of riders and he got followed by Corses, who was in that second group of riders. And Corses managed to get away from Sparvel when Sparvel crashed in the penultimate lap. So Corses second and Sparvel third, just eventually quite comfortably ahead of Seppe van der Boer and Ian Eckert. Not really surprising to see Del Grosso take the win. I feel like we've discussed it quite a lot already. He is simply the best junior or U23, at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Simply the best at the moment, and it's from what I saw on the race through the stories of Alpecin de Koning. Thank you, Alpecin. It looked quite I wouldn't say effortless, but it looked like he was in control for the entirety of the race. And yeah, as you say, it was not something really surprising. It was well within what we could expect from him. He has been a class apart at the moment, and I don't think that will be something that will change over the next part of the season going into the Worlds as well. I think that is, he's at the moment just the clear favorite, the strongest rider in that category. If you look further and if you look into a World Championship, there's not much really that can stop him at that point. And also for the next couple of races that will come for the under-23 in terms of World Cups, he's also going to be the main favorite if he starts. And is on his way, in my opinion, to the overall classification in that regard.
So it's good to remember that in the Youth World Cups, the best 4 results count, so your 2 worst results get scrapped. And Del Grosso with 3 wins in 3 races is pretty much secured of the victory. He already leads now, of course. This 11th place of Michels can easily be scrapped, but Del Grosso just needs 1 more win, and who would bet against it if it goes like this? If Van der Poel is your elitist champion, then Tibor Del Grosso is the people's champion. He is racing in the rainbow jersey, wearing the pink gloves. Yes, Van der Poel did that whip on the pump track, but Del Grosso did it multiple laps, even the full tail whip, a big front wheel flip. Van der Poel, the boring celebrations. Del Grosso does the Cole Palmer celebration. He's the real people's champion right there for you. So that was quite cool to see, and I think that's pretty much all there is to say about him. I thought what was behind him was more interesting. As said, Beaumanel, he started too fast, but still 6th place is a good result for him. It's his best result of the season in terms of the World Cup. He was 10th in Zonhoven, but this is definitely an up from that. The course when they raced was quite tacky already. It was a lot slower than when the junior men raced. They had a bit of an icy course still, especially when they started. This was definitely a full mud tire course. Corses, he finished 2nd. I've spoken quite highly about him, and I will continue to do so. I believe Corses is probably in the U23 category, and also below that, the biggest talent the Belgians are carrying at the moment. His technical bike handling skills are really phenomenal. It's really, really impressive the way he can ride. And then Sparvel, who was in 3rd, what I noticed that his acceleration out of the corners is phenomenal. Do you know, at the end of the course, they just go up this bank, up and down a couple of times. And every time they would hit the top, Sparvel would put in such an acceleration, he would gap courses. Ultimately, he made a mistake, which meant he couldn't fully duel there, but it's impressive. A first-year U23. Bicio was potentially a bit disappointing for the French, but Sparvel definitely made up for that. These are 2 big talents that are coming through the French ranks at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sparvel today surprised me a little bit with his result. I think that he definitely has the potential to be up there, and he's a big talent. Someone that has already proven himself before, but it's difficult when you enter this kind of new arena of the under-23, and sometimes riders can struggle with that a little bit. And he had his races where it didn't go his way entirely, but it seems that he is on the way up. And I think with a podium like this in front of a home crowd, it's almost like it was a sort of I would say maybe a test for what is to come at the Worlds, and he passed that test if you want to put it that way. So I think that's interesting. Sparvel being able to mix it up there with Corses. I think I tend to agree with you that Corses for sure is at the moment. Michels, I think we will talk about him a little later, but Michels is definitely a talent, and in this category probably the main favorite to get himself on the podium for Belgium. Pocorcius as well is a very talented guy, and arguably, looking at his age and the potential that he still has in terms of growth, is probably the biggest talent that Belgium has at the moment, and has areas in which he can grow in the later phase of this progress that he is enduring at the moment. I don't know if you want to go over other names, but I think maybe we can you can discuss a little bit what happened with Michels, because I saw that his jersey wasn't the cleanest after the race.
Yeah, so about Michels, I think that he is obviously quite talented, very talented. I almost am at the point that I don't really consider him a talent anymore, but just like an established name in a similar way as Del Grosso. But I do think that the ceiling of courses is higher than the one of Michels. Michels is a talented rider, but I think his future might even be a bit more on the road. He's doing quite decent things there, so it wouldn't surprise me if we see him like shift his focus there. Whereas for courses, he's clearly a pure cyclocross rider. His skill level, his power numbers, they suit cyclocross more. So that's that. And then for Michels, well, at the Worlds, if you mention Sparvel, he should potentially be in the mix for a podium. Yes, potentially, but Michels is a big name to factor in here. Another name to mention is David Haverdings, who wasn't at the start here today, but it will be interesting there. Michels will need to execute better. He had a bad day today. Again, his start was bad. It is a vulnerability that needs to be better. And then he crashed when he was in second. It looked like quite a hard crash looking at his jersey, which was a bit ripped and dirty. And then later he crashed again. So that was kind of what was up with him. And he went backwards. And on the other hand, we saw riders go forwards. Ian Ackert needed to start far back. He had some issues with his back last weekend, 2 DNFs. He was quite good in Namur, he was good in Gavre, and now he also delivers in the U23 scene. He kept going forward, and he finishes 5th here. That's another big talent, right? He performed last year with a top result at the World Championships, finishing 6th, and he's replicating such success now. That's a dangerous rider. He's going to improve a bit towards the World Championships. Very, very, very dangerous. If we talk about showman, he's also definitely one with a blonde mullet. And then also Stefano Vietzi. He did not really have anything spectacular going on. I saw him like 15th, 16th, but just like last week, he's able to keep the lap times consistent, doesn't fall off a cliff, he keeps pushing, and it resulted in a top 10 today.
Yeah, I think for Vietzi, interesting. I mean, also one of those riders that is, first year under 23, and that obviously puts his results in a way in a perspective. But I think, as you say, it's interesting to see how his development is going, and he's also one of those talents that is kind of coming up through the ranks. So I think it will be interesting. I mean, the thing that I kind of see with this race, and we kind of said it already with the elite races, that it resembles a little bit like the World Championships course that we are going to get. Of course, we don't know what the circumstances will be and how that will develop, but was there like maybe a surprise that you saw in a certain rider that you thought, okay, well, this is maybe something that, this is a rider that maybe could play a role on such a course that you think would not be able to do so on other courses, or, maybe something else that that you saw and noticed during the race that you thought that's interesting for the Worlds that's coming up?
I feel like most riders at the front here are ones that have consistently been there. Seppe van der Boer is definitely improving a bit, but I wouldn't say that there was a real shock name in here. Definitely in these conditions, it was about limiting your mistakes and don't doing too much. But if you look, for instance, at like Jules Simon, he was up there early in the race. He was in the mix. Then he had one real big crash. And that pretty much meant that his race for those front positions was over because all he could do was chase. And then in the final lap, I believe he took another tumble. And that's the nature of this course. And I don't necessarily think that will be the same in Ливан, because that course is even more straightforward than this. Here, at least at that back section around the off-camber, you had like those downhill corners there. I saw a lot of riders make like mistakes there that cost them time, and there was this big off-camber drop, which definitely took a lot of riders victim today. And that wasn't really, at least from what I remember from the event, from the French Championships, which was super, super muddy there, that wasn't the case. So the course is, as you say, similar, but it will 100% depend on the weather conditions, because if it's dry or if it's just below zero all week, we can have a racetrack there. We can have a track for Clément Venturini. We can have a track for the riders with the big engines, group racing. If it's really muddy like it was at the French Championships, you have a cross that's maybe more like Dendermonde than this, because the mud is super thick. That French Championship there was a lot of running. So it's obviously, it makes sense to like draw these parallels because this course resembles it, and it's in France, and the French all built their courses kind of similar. But at the same time, we also need to be wary of the weather conditions. Last year in Tabor, nobody really expected these conditions that we got, and there we were. It was a super, super hard race. The final thing I would like to say, Kai de Bruikere, he had a good start. He was probably feeling a bit optimistic after that podium place in Zonhoven last week. He definitely blew up quite quickly and fell quite far back to 18th, so that was a bit of a bummer. And then Aaron Dox definitely disappointing again. He had that good race in Dublin, that was where he finished on the podium, but then after that it's gone downhill quite quickly. He too is a rider that does well on the road, but really last week he missed the top 10 on both occasions. His result in Namur Elite World Cup was okay, but really this 25th place here in Besancon is something he needs to forget and repack himself towards the rest of the season. Then we shall move on to the junior woman. This race, different than last week. French riders were everywhere in the first lap. I think at some point there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8. They were everywhere, and the crowd was going crazy quite quickly. The only rider in between was the Swiss rider, Chiara Metier. But where in last weekend we saw that it was always Lisson Desprez taking the head start and then Carrier eventually taking over to win the race. This week Carrier didn't feature. Apparently she's been a bit ill, but she definitely didn't make a good impression technically as well. She lost quite a lot of time. This course was quite slippery when they were racing as the ground was just melting. 3 French riders took off, Jean Duterte, Lise Revaux and Lisson Desprez. 2 first years from AS Bike Team and Desprez, and it was actually Revaux riding a very, very mature race. She took the lead. Her technical skills were the best. She put them under pressure. Duterte was probably a bit stronger, but she was punching above her weight. She needed to consistently put in bigger efforts, and at some point her connection with Revaux snapped. Revaux took the win ahead of Duterte and Desprez, a French sweep of the podium with 2 first years in the first 2 positions, and that was a trend because there were 7 first years in the top 10.
Yeah, the French really excelled today, I have to say, in the the women junior category. I think we kind of know that they have these talents in a way, but it felt like it never really came together in one race, and it seems like this was really the race. What a race to choose, that it came together and that they were able, I guess, to really reach that potential that they have and fulfill kind of the expectations that I kind of have of the the French talent that is there. I mean, what do you make of the fact that they collectively at the moment just kind of nailed it and were able to do so well? Do you think maybe has to do with preparation, or the fact that they really found this race a race that was important for them and that they really wanted to do well? I mean, what was your what was your observation in that regard of how the collective result and the fact that they were able to sweep the podium?
So I think there's a number of factors that play in here. So if we start the riders, they are talented. Secondly, the course today was different. It was slippery. The technical skills were necessary. So Revaux and Duterte, who so far have not proven to have the big engine to compete, could really use their skills. And really every corner here was slippery and every corner here required skill. And they had that. And they looked much more natural on the bike, much more confident than if you look at, for instance, Bukowska, or if you look at Giorgia Pellizzotti, who was further down. And then you have just what you mentioned, like, is this an extra important race for them? Did they peak here? I think the French structure definitely deserves to be praised here because their national team coach, François, has really put together a good program. He uses the Coupe de France races, which have massive starting fields, as selection events. You need to qualify for these Coupe de France races through your regional federation, which really encourage grassroots development. He selects them. Then the program is laid out at the beginning of the year. You know what races there are. You know how the selection works. You know how everything works way in advance. You can plan your season. You can plan everything. The team has planned their training camps. They do 2 of them. I believe they did one before the weekend of Hulst and Zonhoven. They did a recon of the course in Louvain. Then they came here to Besancon. Training camp might have been this week. I don't know when it was, but I can't imagine it was this week because this week was Christmas. And why would they do a training camp with Christmas? So their second one will be around the Benidorm World Cup. It's all laid out. It's all structured. And the difference between now and a few years ago is that there's more pathways. You have the Dubois brothers on good cross support through their mountain bike team. You have Clausel, who's now on Van Rijssel team. You have AS Bike team, which has really stepped up its game. And it's no coincidence that these first two riders, both first years, are on the AS Bike team. AS Bike team has great scouting. I praised them before as well for their partnership with FDG. I have also praised them for the fact that they're willing to make tough decisions. To accommodate these young riders, they decided they had to let their arguably best elite rider, Helene Clausel, go. And hopefully down the road it will pay off for them. And it all came together here. Good coaching, good preparation, good structure. Last week they were all a bit collectively disappointing, especially in Hulst. I feel like last year after they did that training camp, that was also the case. And that just happens sometimes. But yeah, it definitely looked good today. And again, they know how to deliver at the championships, Issam.
Yeah, I know. They have the tendency to perform when it matters the most, and I think today was somewhat a showcase of that. It was just interesting to see that they were all able to somewhat fulfill the expectations. I think that, as you say, having the 1-2 both being first years, both from AS Bike, I think that is just, it tells something, and they are really working on a program. And that at the moment, if you look at it, especially now for a women junior, you just see that there is something going on there that is somewhat special. Interesting is obviously going to be, are you able to keep them in cyclocross? Are they going to move to eventually paths that lead to the road or mountain bike? But it's interesting to see. I mean, if I look further down the results, with Bukowska in 4th, I think for her that's probably a very good result. Grossman was for me somewhat of a surprise to see her in 5th, and Carrier even more, because I thought after those last 2 races from Carrier, I thought that was somewhat a consistent basis to expect her to be up there on the podium. I mean, what do you make of those names? Maybe you can start with Carrier in a way, because I feel that was somewhat the biggest story, not being able to get herself in the top 5, finishing 6th.
Yeah, apparently being sick and also like the technical skill here. She's really not technically refined. And for Grossman, which you can argue is a surprise, she is the European champion, but she's technically quite refined. It looked good what I saw today from her. And for Bukowska, we might have a new Clara Honsinger on our hands here, really. Her starts are dreadful. Today was definitely better than the last 2 weeks, but it's still something she needs to work on. She didn't look that comfortable in these muddy conditions, but also by the time she hit that 4th place, she was quite far behind the leaders already. But again, Bukowska has the raw numbers. She just needs to be nurtured a little bit into the right direction. For the rest, kind of riders we've seen a bit this season, Meika Baka was perhaps a bit disappointing. I thought this would have been a good course for her. It doesn't look to be in its place at the moment. Perhaps all the drama surrounding the team has influenced her ability to perform. You need to be relaxed in order to do that. But again, last year she also didn't really stand out until those World Championships where she had a great result. So I also definitely don't want to rule her out based on a stretch of not so amazing results, but also not horrible results. Then let's move to the final race, the men junior. This was a masterclass, Issam by Søren Bruyère-Jourmar. He took the win in Dublin. Last week I kind of doubted him because he couldn't really replicate any of that success. But man, today the start was for Arthur van den Boer. The Belgian champion took off like a madman in the first lap, but he got caught in the second lap. Bruyère-Jourmar was there. He attacked, opened like a 5-second gap. Then his bike broke. I'm not sure if it was due to a crash, but he needed to run like 300-400 meters to the pits, swapped bikes, was 15 seconds down. Pas de problème. Just storms to the front, attacks, 25-second lead, chills, wins by 10 seconds ahead of Van der Boer and Oscar Amy. I mean, that was a dominant performance. And just to give you some insight on the course conditions, they were a bit trickier here because they started on the frozen course, but they kind of broke through the top frozen layer and then opened like the mud that was created yesterday. And due to that, like they started on Flandrian tires and then switched to baby limas and limas, just the muds later on. Some started on baby limas, but it definitely got muddier. The course got a lot worse during the race, so the conditions changed. And for instance, the worse the course got, the better Théophile Vassal began to race. He was on a charge. The muddier it got, the better he got. It looked good for Vassal, and that's also an improvement. I know I spoke about him last week as well, but he really improved, and today was so far his best race of the season. If he can get it a bit more together, he can definitely still move forward and put his name in the mix for a podium place at the World Championships.
Yeah, that is definitely interesting. I think the French here again, they have with Jourmar and Vassal, definitely two riders that, you know, at the moment can be considered as one of the top riders in their category. The first thing that I kind of noticed, obviously, Oscar Amy being able to finish on the podium. But I also saw a certain Milo Wills in 6, and that's a name that I haven't seen. I mean, what can we make of that? And also, in a way, the progression of Oscar Amy, who we have seen, was able to get himself in the top 10 at the last 2 World Cups, at least, I think. But he was not really able to get himself within the top 5. And now it feels like that is quite a jump going into a podium spot. What did you make of his race and the progression there, and also what do you make of Milo Wills?
The Brits delivered today. Milo Wills is kind of like this Slovakian rider of last week. They just move forward during the race. I didn't really notice him at the beginning, but he just kept going forward and then eventually finished 6th. It also meant I didn't get to see that much of him, but the few glances I saw looked like a rider that definitely felt comfortable in the uncomfortable. It was slipping and sliding, constantly coming into the pits and telling them you wanted more tire and wanted less pressure, and adapting and observing. Your race awareness needed to be on point in those conditions. You saw, for instance, the American riders, but also Valentin Hofer, that when the course got worse, they also got worse. They fell backwards. They either weren't comfortable with the conditions or couldn't deal with the conditions as the others could. For instance, Hofer definitely couldn't deal with it. And we've seen that before as well last weekend. So Milo Wills was the opposite. He felt comfortable and he could move forward. And for Oscar Aimé, he was up there all race. He definitely had a couple of good results last year. He's kind of moving now towards what was perhaps a bit expected at the start of the season, because last year he showed himself with an 11th place in Zolder as a first year. In the World Cups it didn't really come out, but he did have a few glances of talent, and he managed to get it together pretty much because it was a technical course. I think that's the big thing here. In these conditions it came down to technical skill, and he has them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think maybe behind the women junior category, this is probably the category that is the most open at the moment. I feel that for sure Jourmar has now shown a couple of times that he is definitely a strong rider and a rider to take into account for eventual world championship. But it is quite interesting to see that the progression of certain riders. As you say, Oscar is definitely now delivering a little bit more than in the beginning of the season, and it looks like more like what we could have expected from him, and it will be interesting to see if he can hold on to that, if he can take that with him, and also be, you know, one of the riders that can maybe potentially podium. at the Worlds. But I think that's quite interesting. I mean, there are some new names in the top 10, but I don't know if you mind, but I think it's interesting to see a certain Czech rider in 14th, Christophe Bazant. It seems, this is sort of, he already raced in Loenhout, but it's sort of somewhat his return. What did you make of his race in 14th? Is it something to be worried about for him? How do you see his progression go in the next couple of races and weeks? And do you think that his Worlds are in danger in terms of being the top favorite?
Well, the top favorite status is definitely highly contested here. I would argue this is more wide open than the junior woman. Junior woman is definitely like a list of 6 names you can put forward, whereas here, I'm sorry, but last week in Zonhoven I watched Benjamin Noel Suarez battle with Mathieu Agostinaccio for the win. They finished 13 and 15th today. They were in a heated battle for those positions until the end. That's a bit of a different battle than last week for the win. And Brière Joumard, while he won in Dublin and here, he was nowhere last weekend. This is the hardest category at the moment, and it's typically that, but this year it feels even more than usual. Bazant, yeah, he looked fine today, but he definitely needs to improve because his form is growing. He missed the European Championships with COVID, was out for a while, then started rebuilding in Spain, but got sick and was forced to skip last weekend's races. He won in Loenhout, but the start field there wasn't that strong. He did beat Oscar Aimé, and he was decent here, but he needed to start far back. He wasn't in the first 2 rows. He actually also was not on the 3rd or 4th row. He needed to move his way through the field, did that quite decently, but just that little bit of form was missing. Technically, it looked okay until in the final lap he had a silly crash in a battle. It was like watching 3 of the favorites for the World Championships, Agostinaccio, Bazant and Suarez. They were battling for 12th position, and that was quite an odd sight to see. And in that list also at some point was Gilles Lejeune, the leader of the World Cup. He had a good weekend last week. He should have done well on this course, but he crashed too many times, including one time quite hard on the corner after the barriers, which was one of the easier courses on the circuit. So it's definitely wide open here. Bazant, I would still think he's going to find that form. He's going to do some more training and build towards those World Championships now. But it's wide open, and that's also the great thing about these races. Really, if you're ever going to a cyclocross race, please attend the junior races. It's 80 mad riders storming at the first corner. It's just vibes. No brain goes off. We just do whatever we want.
I've seen a few of these races, a lot less than you have, but I have to say that is also something that I notice. It's those junior races are definitely something quite a spectacle, especially the first lap. But overall, it's one lap you have 2-3 leaders at the front, and those 2-3 leaders could be well outside the top 10 after 2 laps. So it's I can see your argument, by the way, of saying that the men junior category is maybe a little bit more open in terms of what can happen for the podium spots and also the winner than the women junior. But I think overall, in the elite category, I wouldn't say that the places are locked, but at least we have. I think that it's we kind of know who will try to go for victory, and the podium spots, although they are not taken, there are certain riders that can go for that, but we also know that's a selected group. And for the under 23, it's maybe a little similar. But when you go to the junior categories, it's really interesting to see how the riders are developing and how it's also fluctuating and changing over the course of just the World Cup races, but overall in a way. I have to say it's really interesting. I mean, Lejeune was maybe, if you would call someone the disappointment of the day, probably I guess he was the disappointment of the day, and it's a bit of a shame that he wasn't able to bring up a fight and get the points for his classification, because I think Joumard is now ahead of him. But as you stated, I think it's with the World Cup classification goes a little bit different in the junior categories. So you have to wait and see how that will in the end be calculated. But yeah, I don't really have any other remarks unless you have.
No, I think we should definitely wrap up now. It's been long enough. A lot of details here from Besancon. good day of racing. I really enjoyed it, and I hope all of you enjoyed the podcast. We will be back tomorrow. Night racing, night action in Diegem. Thanks for listening, Issam. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for your insight on the junior races, and I can't wait for a late night talking and covering the super prestige of Diegem. Can't wait.
Exactly. We will be back tomorrow. See you guys then. Goodbye.